Welcome to part 4 of Editorial Retouch from start to finish. My name is Krunoslav Stifter, and if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're watching this on my blog, wherever you're watching, as you know, you can leave comments and you can ask me questions. I'll try to answer. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click a like button, share it, and of course, if you'd like to receive more of these kind of videos, please subscribe. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. If you remember, we talked about extensively about comparing this image that we're working on with what we're trying to get, the Gucci ad style of looks. Now, of course, normally I might not force the image to be something that's not, but this is for tutorial reasons and it's kind of fun project, so I decided to ask that age-old question everybody's keep asking me: how do I get this look? So in order to show you how you can take somewhat similar looking image and transform it into something very similar, this is what I've got. This is of course already processed image, and what I'll do is I'll show you first how I've done it, and then we'll go over each section in more detail and I'll show you what exactly have I done. But first let me show you my processing, what I've done. I did raw conversions first. I did multiple raw conversions, I did some retouching, and I did some color correction. But that's pretty much it. It wasn't that complicated. Now let me go back to the image that, if you remember, was the last state of the image when we worked inside of Camera Raw in the last video. And we opened the image up inside of Photoshop as a smart object. So quick intro on smart objects. Smart objects basically are embedded. It's a container within Photoshop that lets you embed just about anything inside, from 3D models to videos to, well, raw files. And the great thing about it is that this is a layer inside of Photoshop with most of the functionality you would expect from a regular layer. However, there is this icon at the bottom here which lets us know that this is a smart object. So if I double click on it, it's going to open up inside of Photoshop. Inside of Camera Raw. And here we have all our sliders, everything. This is a raw file, it's not a JPEG file or TIFF. This is actually a raw file with all the editability of the raw file. And if you remember, this was the original image, then we have adjusted it with the intent to adjust for the details only on the model, mainly the skin tones and the highlights and things like that. That was our main purpose in our last conversion. And then I showed you some stuff about Camera Raw and we clicked OK. This is what we got, right? Well, we want to now create another raw conversion and maybe even another one, and then blend all those raw conversions into one composite that gives us the best that we can get from our image. Now if I double click again, I could in fact try to adjust for the background and the model separately using some of these adjustment tools here, like the adjustment brush and so on, but it's not nearly as effective as masking inside of Photoshop. Another thing I want to say is that if you were to now try to create another raw conversion, and typically thing most people try to do is just copy this by pressing Ctrl J or Command J, creates a copy. Well, that's nice, but if I double click on the second of the copy of that and I reduce the exposure to prepare the background to be more darker, right? And I click OK, the Photoshop will prepare the file, but the problem is that now both our copy and original are adjusted the same way. So we have no difference. This is a good thing if you want to, adjust multiple images all at the same time, maybe in different documents, using link smart objects, or if you want to do some maybe graphic or web design, so you have a logo and you move it around your composition and you change one and then all the copies change as well. But for our purposes, this is not what we want. So I'll go back to original image, and instead of just copying it, I'll right click on it and choose new smart object via copy. Now at first glance they look the same, but if I double click on the second smart object of the copy and I reduce the exposure just like I did before, I'm going to click OK, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to see two different versions, right? So this is now a way we can add multiple raw adjustments at any point in time and continue working. So let's see how we can use this using masks as well to get the most out of our image. This is not something I would always do. Sometimes the image is in such character, in such a nature, that this is not necessary. But in our particular case, if you remember, the problem was that the model was the darkest part of the image and the background was the brightest. But if you look at our reference image, it's the reverse. The model is the brightest, the background is the darkest. So in order to match those two things, we would have to create multiple raw conversions. Like I said, we could try to use the tools within Camera Raw, but they're not as precise as masking. So let me go back to already retouched version. Let me show you what I've done. So first thing you'll notice here is that I have my, well, just like before, our original conversion. This was very bright, but I like the details we had in the skin tones, right? All of the details we would want, they're all there. So that was pretty nice. Unfortunately, the background and some of these shadow areas here are a bit too bright, meaning that, well, the background we know has to be a lot darker, and the shadow here is a bit too bright. So the problem with that is that it doesn't have enough contrast to make the dynamic inside the image, to make it dramatic like this one. To match for that, I have made 3 conversions, and I've called them highlights, which is this one, midtones, which is the majority of the image, and then one for shadows. So let's see what I've done here. Okay. So this was the one for the background, for the sky and everything, right? Very dark, which is great for the sky. It's starting to look similar to this one, but unfortunately everything else is way too dark. So I have made one for midtones, which looks a lot better, but it's still a bit too dark, and just the details in the shadows could be a little bit better, right? So what I needed to do is I needed to use layer masks to combine the very dark conversion with very, midtones, and then on top of that highlights. Now, if you never used layer masks, it is a pretty standard feature inside of Photoshop, and if you're doing any kind of serious retouching, I would highly recommend you master masking. Now, I don't want to talk about it like you're a complete beginner, because I will assume you already have some understanding of it. If you don't, just ask me and I'll leave you some links to really good tutorials on how to use masking tools and all that inside of Photoshop. But what I've done here is I've created a mask to just affect the background. And as you can see, this mask basically protects the model, or this area where his face is, protects the skyline area here, and then it lets the very dark version through and makes it visible in the back. So what it does, it made everything brighter except the background, right? But on top of that, I also wanted to add the highlight version we first did, but this is way too bright, so I had to mask that as well. And this is the mask version now, just affecting the highlights inside a model, before and after. Now it's a pretty loosely painted mask, as you can see, with my brush tool, nothing really major, and we'll go over this a bit more later when we look at the masking and more in detail. But basically, using those 3 raw conversions, like I showed you earlier, I was able to combine the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights using masks to get this look, which is pretty much what we're looking for. Now we still need to adjust a little bit more for the colors, and we need to retouch this, but generally speaking, this is a pretty good solid foundation, all done in raw. Just used multiple raw conversions and masking. So we have used the raw, and good thing about using the raw versus trying to do this with curves or levels inside of Photoshop is, as you must know, the raw data has the most possible data inside, and the tools within Camera Raw, for example, are really good. Now let me talk about the adjustments I did, because you have watched me do adjustments for this one, remember, in the last video? So for the midtones, I did pretty much the same thing. The only difference is that I have mainly reduced the saturation a bit, added vibrance, which is something I like to do. If you don't know what the difference between vibrance and saturation is, saturation saturates every pixel pretty much the same way. Vibrance tries to find those pixels or those areas that are already saturated and leaves them a little bit less saturated, and those areas that are not saturated tries to boost. So it's kind of more intelligent saturation slider. Using the combination of the two, you can get some really nice effects. So I suggest you play around. But that's pretty much what I've done, and I got my midtones. And for the shadows, I did pretty much the same thing, except I had to set all the sliders here to 0 because I remember originally the image was very dark. So by using those 3 adjustments and some masking, I was able to use three different versions of this raw file and get this really nice foundation for my further editing. Now, how I've created these masks and all that, I'll talk about that in the segment where I go into details about this. So let's look at the retouching group. This is where I applied some retouching. So let's take a look. First thing I did was I have basically managed to reduce some of the distracting elements. Now, when it comes to retouching, my main concern with retouching is try to find the distracting elements and remove them. Now let me show you what the original looked like. This was the original. This was the retouch version. So what have I done here? Well, typically I would create a blank layer and use my clone or heal tools to remove distracting elements. So if I zoom here to his face, you can see some of the elements I removed. Now if I zoom a little bit here to, let's say, 100%, there was an area here which was, as you can see, it was a bit distracting, so I have just cloned that out. Now there was some elements in the sand here that I didn't like, that I thought were a little bit more distracting. Same here. And of course the controversial part of this process might be this, right? This 2 boulders here, these 2 rocks. Now let me ask you a question. Is it possible that if the camera was, or if the photographer was leaning towards the right a little bit, that maybe he wouldn't capture those rocks, or that if he was to shoot the model on a different part of the beach, we wouldn't see them? Of course, right? So that is not, those rocks don't really are not important for the image. They're not an integral part of the image. They're just there. They're part of the beach. They just happen to be there. So on those bases, I find them potentially a bit distracting because they're so close to his foot here. And the kind of, if you go with your eye following the line across his chest, down his leg, and boom, 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 you get to this area, which kind of is a distracting for me. So I decided to remove it. And unfortunately, when I do that, what you'll start to notice that if you divide the image in 2, you split it in half, what you're starting to see is that on the left, there's a lot more busy things going on. The model is closer to the background. There's a larger body parts here, and there's some rocks here. There's more waves here, more closer to the camera. So it's almost like now the left and the right part of the image, the left is a bit heavier in the detail area and the more what's going on than the right one, if you remember. So now looking back at this rock, it kind of balanced out what's going on, but I still don't like that it's so close to his foot. So what do? Well, first thing I did is I removed it, but then if you remember from the previous video, I believe, I wasn't sure should I or should I not leave this horizon line. And I asked you for the comments, and somebody in the comments section said, well, you should maybe leave it like this because it could be a part of so-called Dutch tilt, sometimes used. And I thought, okay, at first glance it might look okay, but then when I removed this rock, I realized that it's just too little going on. And if I straighten the image, crop it a bit, it would not be a problem anymore. So when we get to cropping this image and maybe adjusting it, I'll show you how then that problem with the rock is no longer a problem. The image gets much more balanced out. So right now I'm missing that rock, but I still find it annoying being next to his foot. I think it's a bit of a distraction. That is why I have removed it. Now let me zoom in and show you what else I did. Some of these smaller blemishes, nothing really major. His lips were a bit of a problematic. Now I don't have to go in super detail here because, well, it's going to be viewed from a bit farther away. It's not a close-up, it's an editorial, it's not a beauty shot, so we don't have to be so precise. But we do want to reduce potential distractions. As somebody said, and remove all the unnecessary so that the necessary may live. Make it simple as possible, but no simpler. And that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I did regarding the retouching, regarding removing elements. I'll show you how I did that in later, but just right now I wanted to explain why I've done it and what I did exactly. Then I'll show you how. Now I've done some dodging and burning here using soft light layer mode, and I'll talk about this when I get to dodging and burning. But let me just zoom in so you can see nothing really major, just a smaller stuff, just to kind of even out some of the details here. I don't even know if it's visible in half of the image because it really wasn't that bad. You see just a few elements here and there, nothing really that major. And then I did some dodging and burning using a much bigger brush. First, let me show you the smaller details that I've done. So they're pretty tiny, nothing really specific. I've done I evened out some shadows and highlights in the sand here next to his hand. That's pretty much it. Now when it comes to dodging and burning using a more bigger brush, as you can see here, this is where I've done some more work on highlights. I wanted to basically use the light to shape the image to guide the viewer's attention more towards the highlights. And here's what I've done. See? So this was before, this is after. Starting to look much nicer, right? We are basically now giving more separation between the shadows here and the highlights. I've added some more, I painted some more highlights on his physiques to make it more, more ripped, but not too much. We don't want to change the image too much, just to kind of make the image more dynamic, to make the shadows and highlights be more, there has to be more contrast between the two to make the image more contrasty, more dynamic, more interesting. And then last thing I did, there was some discoloration in the skin. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a big red chunk of area here, and then here there isn't as much. So I used some manual painting of the color. As you can see, this was before, this is after, to just even out some of the color here. And I used color layer. We'll talk about that later, all of this, how I did it. I just want to show you what and why. And retouching, now let me just activate and deactivate the entire group. Right, so made the image a lot more cleaner. Now the focus is much more on the model and much less on the other elements, because this is not a beautiful beach that we want without the model, right? We want the dynamic between them two, but the model should come first. So any distracting element around him I would remove in order for him so he can be the main actor in this image, in this scene. They often say that a photographer is a director. Well, I would say that probably the job of photographer is to direct the image, where everybody goes and what everybody should do, And then as a retoucher, either if he retouches himself or hires a retoucher, the idea is more towards trying to misdirect. In other words, the direction part is done. Now it's about misdirection. It's about hiding the elements you don't want the audience or the viewer to see, and giving them more enticing elements, stuff that they do want you to see. And we use shadows and highlights. We use cloning and healing to remove elements from the image. We use those kind of things to make the image appear more interesting, to guide the viewer's attention inside the image. Kind of like a magician, right? It's about misdirection. So for example, if I showed you the entire group retouching, so this was before. Now what are the elements that can distract you here, that can take away from focusing primarily on the model? Where things like the boulder here, then this speck of whatever it is, some shimmer on the waves, then of course some elements here in the sand, they could all be a distraction. It makes the image a bit more busier than it should be. We're trying to make it elegant, right? Now if you think about elegance, in one way you can think of it as, well, it's just to make something really simple, like you can just remove stuff, and we could really blur this image, remove every detail, everything. If you want to make it complex, just add a bunch of stuff. But in order to make it elegant, we want to make it still complex, but to appear as simple as possible. And this is an example of that. Right? So if I remove all the elements inside the image, what you can see is that, well, all of the elements are now starting to go away, just like we wanted to. Now the focus is much more on the model and much less on the actual background. And then of course comes the color correction. Now again, I used a lot of masks, so let's take a look. So this was the color correction. Even this image, right the way it looks now, it looks pretty good, but remember, we are trying to go more for this look. So in order to change the colors a little bit, I had to adjust some of the things. And this is the kind of more edgy look I got. Now of course, if looking at this image without color correction for a while, it's starting to look really good this way it is. But then when you activate this and you look at it for a while, then it starts to look good the way it is now. So which one should you leave? Well, you have total control, of course, but we are trying to, our goal was to try to get this particular look. So I'm going to leave those adjustments on. So let me show you what I've done here. First thing, I've noticed that the left side of the image here it's got more turquoise, more green hue versus the right one. So I've added a hue adjustment layer, and I've added a mask just for that area. And in the hue adjustment layer, I think I went to maybe cyans, yeah, and just change it a bit here, right? So that allows me to change just this area. Now the second thing I added was some good old brightness and contrast, and I wanted to protect already bright foreground here, so I protected that with a mask. The rest is affected, and what I've done here with brightness and contrast, I click auto button here. Sometimes I like to do this because without it, with it. Now here's the difference, that sometimes it's hard to say by eye, are you good with your highlights and shadows? Have you adjusted them properly? And Photoshop just analyzes the image, so it's not as biased as I am. And usually by clicking the auto button, I can simply click on it and adjust for those little changes inside of highlights and shadows. And in this case, I knew that maybe I could add a bit more shadows or highlight contrast, but I wasn't sure. And with this auto button, it quickly adjusted it. Then I added one for, I thought that there should be more contrast, more dynamic between the shadows in the model and the highlights here, right? So I added an adjustment, basically a curves layer here, and I added that only to the shadow area. So let me show you how that mask looks. So using a first selection of the model, then I used a luminance mask to target only the shadows, and this is how the mask looks. Now if you know how to do this and you already have a selected model, this is 30 seconds, 10 seconds, so it's really not that difficult, and it does a beautiful job because it only affects the shadows in the model, not the background, nothing else, and kind of gives more contrast to the model without affecting everything else. I really like that. It's a subtle but significant change, I think. Then I wanted to adjust the background here, mainly because we wanted to try to get this kind of turquoise look that we see from Gucci, right? So that's what I did here. I added another mask where I protect the model, I protect the foreground, and I'm affecting only the sea, the ocean, and the background, the sky. Right, and then I just went to a RGB, made it a little bit brighter on areas, and then I went through different channels, I think, yeah, on the green, and I haven't even touched anything else, so I just added a bit of green here to give it that a bit of a turquoise look and made it a bit brighter. Now this matches more the look we see in the Gucci. Otherwise I could easily left it like this and even looks good. And the other thing I did was, well, unfortunately, of all these adjustments, there's a lot of reflection of the different colors on his underwear. So we're gonna fix that by making a selection, really loose selection of the underwear, and I applied just a hue saturation on, I think, cyans, blues, maybe magentas, and I just reduced the color, basically made them black and white, and that's it, we're done. Now I also have another selection here, another adjustment which I didn't activate but I could, and this adjustment is a selective color with attached mask of only the model. So anything I do will only affect the model. And now if I wanted to maybe change his color of the skin to be more yellow, that is easily achieved by moving this slider, and they only affect him. So as you can see, that's really not a problem, but I'm not going to do that for now. And if I really wanted to, this is the look. If you take a look at the Gucci, that's very similar, almost identical in terms of color. But if that wasn't the thing that we were trying to get, I think I would be pretty satisfied with this kind of look, right? This would be the look that looks pretty good. We have nice contrast between warm and cold tones, so why not? Why not? This could also be a good look. But since we're trying to get that look, maybe if I set this to color blend mode, let's see how it would look. Yeah, it will give me a bit more contrast, just changing the background, and even that looks good. Or I could leave it to normal, which makes it a bit more and gives it more brightness. So that could also work. Without this, the image looks really good as well, but we're going for that look, so I'll add a little bit of that. But as you can see now, this is not a super complicated thing. Let's take one quick look. So this was multiple conversions. Right, I have made the image brighter here, then I've added some highlights painted with multiple conversions. Then when it comes to retouching, I have removed all of these elements. Look at the image, right, before and after. And then when it comes to color correction, last thing we did was make it appear more similar to this one. And that is how I would try to turn that image into a Gucci style look. Now it could work, but this image is not it's not just about that look. There are so many things we can do with it and it will look good. But since we said that we're going to try to get that Gucci look, I'll leave it like this and I'll adjust the rest of the images. Now this video is about what I've done and why I've done it. So in the upcoming episode, I'll show you in I'll show you these three sections, right? How do you do different multiple row conversions, and how do you use masking? How would I retouch some of the more tricky elements in this image? And finally, color correction combined with masking. And then using those techniques, you can apply to any image. Now, hopefully by seeing me why I've done it and what I've done, this gives you a better understanding of what we're going to be doing, and then how is what I'll show you in the upcoming episode. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and if you see any videos that you like on my channel, please give me a thumbs up, click the like button, share it if you like with your friends, spread the word, leave a comment, give me some feedback so I can make better videos. And if you like to receive more videos that I upload and get a up-to-date state on my channel and the tutorials I make, please click on the subscribe button. And here's a really interesting thing I would also recommend. You see this little icon here, this little wheel? If you click on it, there's an option called Send Me Updates, and you click just Save. That way you will get updates to your directly to your inbox in your email, not just on the channel update, and you will never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.